what numbers do we need to keep a bare minimum of our civilization functional? Because you see a lot of these things happening where people go, nope, no doobity doop in my body, so I'm not going to go back to work. But they're already starting to see massive effects of things breaking and not functioning correctly because there's not even a minimum amount of staff to keep things at barely functional level. When you go below that across all industries, then what happens? So you got to look at bare minimum numbers to keep a society functional. So the population migration is going to be one thing. Now, the economic downturn, reset, collapse, whatever you like to term it, is what's value based on. Economists and Wall Street are sounding the alarm. Investors are ignoring the parallels between 1929, 99, 2007, and today. We are absolutely in the everything bubble, and investors are now betting on the Fed, threatening to raise rates 6 to 7 times through 2024. If the debt ceiling is raised, there will be an economic catastrophe. Learn how simple it is to add physical gold and silver to your portfolio ahead of the rise in inflation and predicted price rises. Patriot Gold Group has the no fee for life IRA, where your IRA or 401k can be in physical gold and silver, and you may be eligible for the no fee for life IRA. Call 1-800-356-4470 and get a free investor guide today. And with the knowledge that Patriot Gold Group is Consumer Affairs' top-rated gold IRA dealer from 2016 to present, click on the link in the description box below for more information. And now on with the video.
And boom, we're back for another episode of Alfacast. I'm Mike Winter, and I'm here as always with Dr. Barre Lando, coming to you live and correct from the beautiful state of Jefferson on the Smith River here on the border of California and Oregon. We are so pumped for the fall, even though it's been a little chilly, which should be fitting for today's guest, David DuByne from Adapt 2030. This is going to be a great one. David's returning. It's been about, 2 years since we've had David on. He was one of our first big guests on Alfacast, and he was so cordial enough to come on when we were just a little YouTube channel with 800, if that, subscribers, and really helped us out a lot back then. And we're just really excited to catch up with David and see what he's been up to. And on a more metaphysical side of things too, if we consider that Gaia or Sophia is a living consciousness entity, and we're going through a consciousness expansion right now, that could crystallize in the expansion of the physical form too, of course. So there's and you're talking about these heavenly bodies, these planets, David, too. I think of Rudolf Steiner and his notion of these planets emanating from Earth or from consciousness. And this gets a little trippier, but these are living, breathing entities themselves that are directly electrical, right? And are all communicating each other through the ether or through the electromagnetic, whatever we want to call it, right? This invisible force that you talk about, the Birkeland, whatever we want to talk about. And so we are in a live, connected reality. And I think with the materialistic reductionist science that we're forced under, they refuse to look at that. And so, this is really important, I think, for climate and understanding how the climate works, because I personally believe we can affect the climate with our own consciousness. And that's why we've done shows about orgone technology and Wilhelm Reich. And I think it's important because it can help us look at solutions for helping us with our farm here, with impending potential, June and July frost, for all we know, with this grand solar minimum, what the sun's doing, and understanding really what the sun is and what the plasma is and how all this affects directly with our consciousness. So for me, it's really exciting because I believe we are finally getting into the enriched science that we really need to be diving into, and through both observation and understanding the spiritual side of it more.
And Barry, you brought up a little point there. In Melbourne, on that day of rage that was occurring just before the protest, they had the biggest earthquake ever recorded in Melbourne. So you really have to wonder, was that what you were referring to? The human themselves triggering that through the emotional state at that one vector on the planet, Because, or was it a technological triggered event? And, you know, I'm wondering, I put it into the two camps because we're starting to see at least some data points where the strictest lockdowns are happening and the most, let's say, removal of people's liberties seem to now have the largest natural disasters happening directly over those areas, whether it be the once in a 1,000-year flood, the largest mudslides, volcanic eruptions, or earthquakes themselves. I mean, literally within square feet of where these events are happening. You just got to wonder, is it now the human resonance field that's triggering on it? It has a physical effect on this planetary body here.
Yeah.
You know, it's becoming very connected in a correlation now between these events and what's happening on the ground, for a better term.
Yeah. And just like a human body, you know, there are trillions of cells that, you know, are a composite that make up the human body. And there is a central intelligence that has mechanisms to keep things in equilibrium, cleansed and in a regenerative cycle. And the earth, regardless of what we think its shape is a living, you know, technology and intelligence in and of itself. So if the cells, you know, which include us on the so-called surface, are creating toxicity, just like in the human body, the earth will have mechanisms that will discharge pressures. You know, just like on an emotional plane, when we're in some kind of traumatic event in our life, a lot of pressure builds up, and then we usually have to have some event to discharge it, even if it's unpleasant. You know, I believe the earth does the same thing. Now, of course, we have people on the ground also that are manufacturing weather and trying their best to manipulate that too. But I think far overriding that is just the effect that we have and the mechanisms that within the earth that are there to keep us cleansed, including in the atmosphere. You know, lightning is an example of a purifying element whenever it happens. And, you know, how many times after a storm do we go outside when the sun's shining again and we just feel uplifted? And, you know, not just because the sun's out again, but because, you know, we really feel an upliftment from the cleansing, from the pressure release. And it's just like, you know, when you get over a little cleansing yourself that we might call a cold or a flu, you know, after you get over the symptoms, you feel better than ever. So the earth as a living sentient being has those mechanisms that are there at play to give us an opportunity to live another day and have our experience.
I like the after rain air. I'll agree with you. You know, that's one of the best feelings is going out after an intense thunderstorm and front rolls through. If it's rained for a couple of days and going out and breathing that refreshed atmosphere and just every cell just comes back to life again. You can smell it. You can taste the freshness. It's something I would highly recommend everybody chase the rain, you know.
Yeah.
Ozone therapy, baby.
That's why surfers are so happy. They were sitting out in the negative islands the whole day as the waves are crashing. They're sitting out right in the zone of that. Yeah.
That's why surfers traditionally are just so chill, right? And just at peace, man. It's like, that's why we talk like this, bro, because it's just, we're out there. Totally, man. So David, let's get into where you're thinking the weather's coming in terms of, do you see this a minimum coming? Are we in it already? What are your kind of feelings now since we last talked? Like I was mentioning on our email, I mean, we're hitting in the low 30s already here in the lower Pacific Northwest in early October with frost coming in already. What are you seeing right now from your side of things?
What you're seeing now, again, it's my personal opinion. It's a lot of people I talk to, and I try to arrive at my own ideas after I synthesize the information. It's going to continue to amplify as pressure systems get locked in over areas for a longer period of time. You know, you got to think about over the last, let's say, I'll even say 200 years since the Dalton minimum, which was a very light grand solar minimum. But if we go back to the Maunder minimum, which was considered a heavy event, dropping Earth's average temperature 1.78 degrees, that's on an average, You got to think that's a drastic shift. That's near 4 degrees Fahrenheit, just as the average. So can you imagine the winters coming in cooler and the periphery seasons being that much cooler? You would take weeks, if not months, off your growth season. So keeping that in mind as just a reference point in time, let's say 1650, well, Earth's pretty much locked in and reestablished an equilibrium with the magnetic field of the sun. So our Earth's magnetic field and the sun's magnetic field, albeit outside the 11-year solar cycle, which dictates what happens in the Pacific Ocean, you get El Nino, La Nina, that had been locked in for about 400 years. So the cloud cells stabilized themselves. The jet streams had locked into their positions. Now you're starting to see these jet streams going out of their normal position, what they call these Arctic vortexes or whatever you like it. Now there's a new term. Like I said, last time we talked, look for this new term, the equatorial vortex, because they had to explain the heat that's bending completely off the equator because the jet streams are going in such disarray. So if the sun's stepping down now into a 400-year event or even more on the intensity, the cloud cells are going to try to readjust themselves, and they're going to fight for space in the atmosphere, right along with the jet streams all colliding. And then the cosmic rays are adding new cloud layer up there around 18,000 feet. So the precipitation events that we're seeing are going to continue to amplify as cloud cells continue to crash in on each other, mixed in with another whole layer on top of the jet streams trying to fight to find new positions, and they're getting squeezed out. That's why we're getting these intense lows going clear down into central Mexico, even down past Cuba. So the rain events shall continue in intensity, and the droughts where they are now, they're going to lock in for a little bit longer period of time. You know, before it would be a drought for a year, and then it would alleviate, and then you do this back and forth. But the way it's looking now, things are going to start locking in place for years on end, and then they'll go a swing between multi-year. So if we're looking at dry conditions right now in some places, that continue. The cooler temperatures on the periphery season in the more northerly latitudes is going to amplify. You'll see that. And the southern hemisphere seems to be leading the northern hemisphere this grand solar minimum in terms of, if you look down there during the winter time, you can get a glimpse of what the northern hemisphere winter and spring will be like. Now, in terms of magnetism, the volcanism itself is one thing. Yeah, there'll be more earthquakes and landslips talking about this thing, but an outlier not a lot of people are really glimpsing and adding into their risk assessment is volcanic ash. Now, volcanic ash in a regional area, yeah, you might have to leave your home. You couldn't drive your car. But further afield, when you're talking about animal husbandry and you're out letting your goats, chickens, cows, pig, whatever it is, wild forage out there, they're not going to be able to, because the ash will not allow them to eat out into the grass or the silage anymore if it's grown in the fields. So moving forward, you're going to be looking for more eruptions with more ash into the air. That's going to affect that, even fish farming. The gills are going to get stopped up in these fish, like we saw in a couple of real large eruptions down in Peru and Ecuador over the last 4 or 5 years. So coming into this, you know, self-sufficiency and sustainability is one thing to think about. I've eaten vegetables in Costa Rica that had ash on them, and it's just gritty on the teeth. And you go back through a myriad of historical studies, and one of the outliers they do to see how much volcanic activity there was is they look at the teeth decomposition and see how many scratches there were in the teeth of the people that they found in the graves, or when they're going back through the last 8,000 years, finding skeletons, et cetera. They look into the dental records of these people living at the time to see how much grit was in the teeth of the food they were consuming, because there was more volcanic ash in the air. So now we're thinking about this feedback loop of more volcanic activity, and how will that affect you and I trying to have our own lives off the main system with our own animals out here. But what happens if they're not able to eat because the volcanic ash is in their food supply, and yours too? And you know, you can bring that out into the whole mechanized system of global agriculture, agribusiness. What about the silage for the cattle? What about the silage and it'll run through the entire food ecosystem with this ash problem. And not a lot of people are talking about protecting their food. Are you going to put everything in a greenhouse? I mean, you know how difficult that is. Vertical agriculture, How are you going to grow everything if you lose power and you don't have heat in the middle of winter to heat your greenhouse? There's just an enormous amount of things to think about with just this one variable, ash in the atmosphere, that's going to make food unconsumable for animal or people. And I'll stop there.
And historically, I think we've seen some quote unquote pandemics, global pandemics related to the ash and related to volcanic activity. So in terms of historical records and stuff. So that's a fascinating thing. Where in your mind do you think some of this activity would be? Do you have any actual geographic pinpoint in terms of where you think we might see some of this?
Cascadia, for sure. All the way down to California, 2024 or earlier. These are known hotspots that go off every grand solar minimum on the 400-year cycle. So there's a lot of charts, and the best thing to do, if anybody's saying, well, how do you find all this information? Man, what do you do? Well, yeah, I do a lot of research, and I make a lot of phone calls, and I listen to other information too. But if you go to a PDF search engine, because if you go to the net today and you're in your, even Brave or DuckDuckGo, when you go in there and you try to search for some information on the regular internet, you're just inundated with overflow of garbage and things with a little bit of snippet of fact. You want to go to a PDF search engine, then put your key terms in there, because all that does is bring you PDFs from, resources and universities, et cetera. And they're all usually peer reviewed, most of them. There's a few independents that are plugged in there, but almost all of that. And once you start finding your first key term, and you open up a document and you get some keywords there, then you can plug those in to get better results. And eventually you can really wire down some very specifics of precipitation and stalactite cores from this area and these specific years. And then you can just go place by place across the planet and look for specifics, precipitation, drought, population migration, societal collapse, ruins, and different leftover bits of civilization that have disappeared that are rediscovered in archaeological digs, and you can quantify that. But then at the same time, you can definitely take a look at the ash cores that when they're drilling in lake core, drilling sediments, or if you get somewhere further north or there's somewhere there's ice, they can really get some good indication of how much ash was around in different latitudes based on the ice cores. And you start to map it out where these volcanoes have gone off time and time and time again, and you put them into a timeline, and then you see, oh, every 400 years, this seems to go off at the same time that the sun steps down.
Yeah, this seems to connect with a lot of reset theories too, that go to the Tartarian stuff and the mud flood and all this. And it really, I think, points a lot to the sun activity. And I think people need to look more to that, because maybe we're missing something there. But in terms of the greenhouse idea too, in terms of heating and stuff, I mean, the geothermal regulated kind of sunken greenhouse idea is a pretty good one, because you're using just the natural heat of the earth with long pipes, and something that I know Barre and I have talked about putting at the AlfaVedic gardens and at my house as well. So there are some really inventive, old school, just very simple ways to go about getting your food more secure that doesn't rely on burning fossil fuels or solar panels and stuff like that, using mirrors, being in a place where you're getting enough sun. Now, of course, if you have ash and a layer over that's blocking the sun, I mean, that's getting tough. You're going to have to start growing stuff that doesn't need as much sun. So this is when I get spiritual, David. It's like, and this is why I like the Oregon Wilhelm Reich stuff, because it's like, maybe we can counter this. And this gets into like what really is the sun and how our spiritual powers interplay with the electrical systems, so that we can create a better form of protection that's beyond just mainstream kind of materialistic science. I don't know. It gets trippy, but kind of when you're looking at global volcanic ash covering the world, it starts to go there. It's like, what else can we look towards, in terms of solutions?
It'll be regional first. It won't be the full globe, and you gave me that picture of like a complete ash layer where sun's so dim, you can barely see through it. But with the Reich devices, with the copper piping sticking up, I'm wondering if you could aim that up and like clear a part of the sky out there.
Mm. Yeah, the earth pipes and stuff. I mean, we've been pounding those in the ground here and at the farm and stuff, and I'm already seeing effects of that. We saw some really cool angelic swirls of that were coming over that got pushed out. So it's fascinating. And I think we need to start pushing, as Barre talks about all the time, pushing the boundaries of taking alchemy and taking Reiki and Tesla type technologies and exploring them more, because I think we can go places that could help be massive for solutions for the climate.
Yeah, there's no political solution as far as, I'm concerned. There's no present technological solution. We do have the ability to bring technology to the level where it will give us the solution for everything we're talking about. But what I wanted to ask you, David, since you mentioned the three things, that kind of coincide with these events, these natural cyclic events, what did you say? Migration, population reduction, civil unrest, I think. It seems like the powers that be are really trying to prevent some of that from happening and keeping people within danger zones there. So how do you see that one playing out?
I term it as the fingerprints of the grand solar minimum. The population migration, where obviously people are going to move if there's no economy and cooler weather, and predominantly in history, people grew their own food or regionally, and that's all there was. If you couldn't grow, you packed up the wagon or ox cart and you moved to a different location. So in Finland and Nordic countries, after the Maunder minimum, people had emptied that area out. And it used to be a thriving culture. Boats could come in, but there was so much sea ice pack up there, they couldn't ever resupply themselves. So the Nordic countries had emptied out in, say, 1650, 1660. Populations had left, and they were like 10% population of the original. So and people started to re-arrive back in 1720 when the ships could come back in, and those towns had emptied out 90% or so. There was a bare minimum population. And you start to look now, what numbers do we need to keep a bare minimum of our civilization functional? But you see a lot of these things happening where people go, nope, no doobity-doop in my body, so I'm not going to go back to work. But they're already starting to see massive effects of things breaking and not functioning correctly because there's not even a minimum amount of staff to keep things at barely functional level. When you go below that across all industries, then what happens? So you got to look at bare minimum numbers to keep a society functional. So the population migration is going to be one thing. Now, the economic downturn, reset, collapse, whatever you like to term it, is what's value based on? What's value asset going to be? What was it? Well, it was fiat currency. Fiat was based on what? Well, the productivity of a country. And then if you boil it down, the productivity of a nation is its food supply and the production of food. Those available calories can allow other people to do extra tasks, which then in turn create something, make something, create a service, and then that's valued. You don't have any food, you got people laying on the floor malnourished, you're not creating anything of value. So fiat in itself is going to have to be revalued, which makes sense when cryptocurrency comes. A reset of sorts, baskets of currency, including gold, crypto. Of course, it's going to be the central bank digital currencies. It won't be anything native like you all are creating or what's out there in the ecosystem now either. No control in that. They're only going to, put baskets of currencies, gold, and things that are under control again with central bank digital issuance. But then also you have this thing, the government overthrows and the political discontent that arrives when people are hungry, they got no jobs, their economies collapse. Then what? Well, they want change in government. But this time it doesn't seem like you can air your anger, your regress, or whatever you like to call it, out to the populace or to the governments anymore. You're all locked down. Nobody can go and do anything to say, hey, we need change. So it does seem that they're trying to front run this whole thing based on past cycles. Mm-hmm. Chinese have tried it, but their food has collapsed. They're absolutely going into a famine in China if they don't get food this year. They're down to the clean your plate campaign. You got to lick every last little piece of grass off your plate. And the kids, because they're not getting as much meat as they used to, the newer generations calling it chewing grass. So
yes,
they're trying to promote vegetarian meals and not so much protein and sort of thing over there because they don't have they've lost their poultry and the pork production pretty much. Every warehouse that was in the flood zones is nothing left. Crops are at 50%, as well as last year, they were 50%. So they're going to go on a massive buying campaign to bring food in the country, and they're already at bare rations anyway. And you got all these power supply disruptions. And in my opinion, if they are stopping soybean press operations over there, which means, you import soybeans from country, whatever, Brazil, United States, you bring in the soybeans and you crush them for oil so people can cook. They have ceased those operations in China. So for me, that's a huge red flag that they're saying, oh yeah, we're stopping some sort of economic, use of power to produce your touch glass for your Apple iPads and thing. Okay, I could believe that. But when it comes down to where they're stopping soy crush over there, that's 50x above on the problem that they're telling publicly, because you don't stop the food production of oil for people to cook in the country and shut those facilities down unless there is such the gigantic power lack and problem over there. So China tried to front run this. They have the best information on the whole planet about during these grand solar minimums, when things collapse. They have 4,000 years of data. They went through 10 of these cycles already. And another fact for anybody who might not believe this, no Chinese dynasty has ever lasted longer than 400 years, ever, because they're on the 400-year collapse cycle right along with the grand solar minimum. And Xi understood at this time, and he was trying to be the only person of power to try to override these cycles naturally, but the population was too large. Food production was in polluted, centralized areas. The dams didn't work. They overflowed. They had to release all the water or flood major city centers, and the countryside was sacrificed. But wait a second, you sacrificed the countryside, but that's where you grow all your food so you could keep people's with the connected CCP and Communist Party ties from getting their car flooded, but you destroyed your food supply. Things have gone completely awry over there. So I don't think they're going to survive this grand solar minimum. I think we're looking for another collapse over there too.
And we also see them, trying to take over areas in Northern Africa and all over the planet, in order to meet their needs. And of course, that's the real dangerous thing, because when civilizations are in the midst of collapse, then that's usually when they go to war as a last resort. And we're already seeing perhaps some pretenses of that right now. So, in the area where we live, we're pretty rural, and the closest town is a long ways away, but a lot of the people from the Bay Area, which is about 10 hours south of here, and actually all over, moving to this part of the state. And of course, these are the people that have the means to do that. They're in bidding wars with houses, up in this area and everything, and paying over the asking price just to get the heck out of the city or wherever they're at. The problem that, a lot of us see that are here is that these people, maybe even some of them are preppers, but I don't think prepping is the answer either these days. I think it's a good idea to have food storage and everything for sure, but it's beyond prepping. You really need a new mindset. You need a new skill set for sure. And these folks that are all moving to places, like where you live, a lot of people are moving to Tennessee. A lot of people, and mostly rural areas. Is that correct? Yeah, like to Florida, Tennessee, Texas, perhaps. And, they're just importing their same mindset and expecting the grocery stores to be open. So those of us that are here and have even been talking about this for a long time and that are prepared, not just with food storage, but, other self-sufficiency measures, that we put in place a long time ago, the quandary I think we're going to find ourselves in is people showing up on our doorstep that are hungry. And, of course, you want to help out whenever you can, but I think some of the people showing up may not be that pleasant and may just, want to take what you have. So, throw that into the mix as well. Do you see similar things happening in rural Tennessee where you're at there with different folks moving in?
Absolutely. And the bidding wars here, I have one of my neighbors is a realtor. I was talking to him, and he heads up all the rural land purchase for part of their company here in East Tennessee. It's nothing commercial, nothing suburbia. It's all just pure rural or forest land that they do, ag land. He was saying that they had a record new price of $120,000 over ask. $120,000 over the asking price. That was a new record set in their company. Never heard. He's like, no, this is so impossible. It's probably higher where you are, because 120K here. The people in California are cashing out in cash, rocking up here, buying a 50, 100-acre farm cash. You know, the prices in California are absurd, and New York and Vermont absurd. So when they come down to places like Tennessee, where it's incredibly reasonable for land, they're paying cash for everything, outbidding. I don't care. I still have an extra $500,000, still extra $2 million, whatever. I'll just pay whatever. Okay, 100,000, 200, 3. Okay, I'm going to outbid you 400. Okay, I want it. It's the only thing that's going to assure my survival.